Hello?
Yes.
We're rolling. Okay. It is 12th, June 12th. Good evening, folks. Ken Hovind here and Alex Wayland. We are at Dinosaur Adventureland. You just took the tour today.
I did.
You teach philosophy in Southern Alabama, University of South Alabama, and said you're an atheist and wanted to come see what we're doing up here, and we're glad you came. So, and we asked if we could do an impromptu discussion on, I'm assuming, creation, evolution.
Sure.
I don't even know. You go first and tell us what is it you believe and why am I wrong and you right?
Well, so short version, yeah, I'm an atheist. I teach epistemology. That's my field of research too. So I'm one of the very few, at least that I'm aware of, Gnostic atheists. So I claim that I can know that God doesn't exist, which is a much farther step than a lot of atheists are willing to take.
Right.
If you're curious about that, I'm happy to talk about it, but it involves a lot of like heavy philosophy and heavy epistemology. But I came here to learn. Like, I love learning stuff, and I love just understanding the world around me. And even though I don't agree with the information that I've been presented here, like, I really, really enjoyed learning about it. You know, everybody was super nice. Cindy, your tour was really fun. Dr. Hovind, you're like the best four-wheel driver on the planet. That was sick. And
I don't ever get accused of that. That's good.
But no, it was a really good time here. Everybody that I met has been super friendly, and I'm really, really happy that we got the chance to come up here, and Dr. Hovind was able to make time to do this. But like I said, like, I'm here to learn, and you know, I like this idea of sort of an informal discussion. Because it gives me the chance to sort of ask things. And one of the things that was actually on my mind, this doesn't quite, it's I guess O'Shea's to the debate, but I was thinking about whether or not the question of a young Earth in particular, or if you wanted to go broader, the question of like, did humans evolve, is that a salvation issue? Because I know that Ken Ham considers it a salvation issue. And I know that Eric Hovind does, but I haven't heard you explicitly say that one way or the other. So in the sense that, if you don't mind, I'd like to give the argument maybe, or I don't know.
Sure, okay, no, I'll be glad to.
Well, so as I understand it at least, the thought is that if you reject the notion that Earth is less than 10,000 years old, or if you were to accept that, you know, humans evolved or something like that, what ends up happening is you read, you know, the very first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, which definitely seems to conflict with that. And so there's a worry that, well, look, if the first book of the Bible describes events that didn't happen, then why would I believe the rest of it? And that does seem to be a genuine salvation issue. And I'm worried about it because I would never, ever want to do anything that, you know, threaten someone's faith. I would never try to convince someone to be an atheist. I've seen, you know, my best friend in the world is a very devout Christian. I've seen his faith in and relationship with God do wonderful things in his life. He's a wonderful father and husband, and he's just a great, great guy. And I know that this belief, this faith, this relationship with God does really awesome things for people. I would never, ever want to do anything to threaten that, because it would be ultimately directly harming someone. So if fundamentally this is a salvation issue, you know, I would be worried from my end to say things that might counter that. But it sounds like from your end, it's only sort of a trivially salvation issue. And what I mean by that is that if you can convince someone that the Earth is very young, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't believe in God at that point. Mm-hmm. But if you flip it the other way around, it does seem perfectly compatible, perfectly fine to believe in God, but also accept, you know, the scientific consensus of evolution of an old Earth. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I do not believe that it is a salvation issue. As I mentioned on the tour, there's only two religions in the whole world, Cain and Abel. Cain brought his fruit and vegetables and said, God, look what I did for you. Genesis 4, God would not accept that. That's not how you approach God. Abel brought a lamb, a sacrifice, an innocent substitute, and that's starting from the very beginning. Same with Adam and Eve. When they sinned, they made aprons out of fig leaves, representing their works. And God said, no, something has to die. And there was coats of skins that he made. So all through the Bible, it's a steady river of blood with all the priests bringing all the sacrifices, whatever it may be. And finally, Jesus dying on the cross. So, no, you do not have to believe in a young earth, 6,000-year-old earth to be saved and go to heaven. Now, I do think as a person, you can believe a lot of crazy things and still become a Christian. God is not willing that any should perish, 2 Peter chapter 3. He wants everybody saved. That's why he sent you here, because I'm going to get you converted, okay? So, he wants everybody saved. But that you can believe a lot of crazy things and still accept Jesus Christ and go to heaven. As you grow in the Lord, you will start to learn, oh, Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning. Oh, well, then the earth can't be old. First place, young earth, 6,000 is not young. 6,000 is a long time. I mean, it's hard to remember 500 years ago when Columbus was trying to find this place, you know. It's hard to visualize 500 years ago. Columbus was looking for America. Well, he was looking for India. That's when the Indians discovered Columbus in their front yard. Can we help you, sir? So I think that 500 is a really long time, and 6,000 is an incredibly long time. So I kind of object to the term young earth, but okay. I know what they mean by that. But no, my answer to the question is it is not essential that you believe the earth is 6,000 years old and in order to go to heaven.
Okay.
Don't believe that at all.
Okay.
You said Ken Ham does believe that?
Yeah, but I'm not, I think he might believe it in the trivial sense that I mentioned, that it might be a way to win souls, but he's never really explained why he thinks that, so I don't want to put words into his mouth or anything like that.
I don't know what he believes on that, but okay.
Yeah. I know you guys do disagree on some
a few minor things, but he's wrong, I'm right, so it's no big deal.
Yeah, it's not a big deal at all. Well, I know you have a thing coming up, and so I've been thinking a lot about, things about... well, I don't want to call it young earth if you don't like that.
Okay, call it young earth. I understand. It's a common term. I know what you mean.
Okay. I've been thinking about things about, the position of young earth creationism that just, I have no idea what a young earth apologist might say in response. I've tried to look online or, find things, and I've never found anything satisfactory to a couple of things. And one of the main things that's been bugging me is this tension. With respect to the flood of Noah. Now, so you guys' view is that it happened, I want to say 4,400 years ago?
The Bible dates would add up to about 4,400 years ago.
Okay. So what we have is, what we observe, I guess, is just a huge variety of speciation of animals, right? Like just a ton of different, I guess, kinds of animals. And there's no way to fit all of those on an ark. And from what I understand, the view is that, well, they didn't, right? There were, maybe early ancestors of these. I don't want to put words into your mouth, though.
It's a good question. I can explain it. I was speaking at I spoke all over the world, but this lady came up and her husband came up to me afterwards. She said, Brother Hovind, my family and my grandparents started a dog kennel, and we raise all kinds of exotic breeds of dogs. And we crossbreed them into all kinds of strange. She said, I can promise you, you give me 50 generic mutts. You pick any mutts off the street. We can selectively breed every variety of dog on the planet today in less than 100 years. So the Bible says they would bring forth after their kind, and 20 times in the first 7 chapters it uses the word kind or sort, and I covered that the other night in my response to Mr. Nelson, who calls himself Aaron-Ra, the sun god. So the Bible would teach that God created the kinds and he gave them the ability to produce a variety of offspring. Well, humans have the same thing. Any family with a number of kids can tell you all the kids are different. They get them the same way, they feed them the same food, and they turn out wildly different. You may have a redhead or a blonde or brunette and tall, short. The genetics is phenomenal. So the Christian response to that would be, Noah probably took about 8,000 kinds of animals on the ark. I think most it's called baraminology. There's a website, baraminology.com, the Hebrew word baramin. Dogs, wolves, coyotes, jackals, foxes maybe are from the same kind. That does not prove that dogs and mosquitoes are the same kind, or could even possibly have a common ancestor. There are 7,500 varieties of apple trees now. Most have been selectively bred by man to get a particular trait, like sweeter or bigger or can stand the drought or certain conditions to grow in. And in the wild, they would all probably revert back to a few hundred varieties. If you turned all the dogs in the world loose into the woods, within a few generations, it would be back to a very limited number, a couple of dozen maybe varieties. But through selective breeding, they've developed, like the Chihuahua beans in here, the completely useless dog.
Oh, I thought he was a Jack Russell.
Beans?
Yeah.
They use beans
He's
areas.
big for it. Anyway. Oh, okay.
Beans is good for bear hunting. You don't need a gun. The bear will die laughing. Come on, Beans. Come on. Anyway, so the Christian response would be, Noah probably took about 8,000 kinds of animals. Since then, they've diversified into literally millions of species. It's a matter of who's dividing it and how. For instance, there are hundreds of species of ladybugs. I think anybody, any 3-year-old would say, that's a ladybug, that's a ladybug, and that's a ladybug. I mean, it's just a ladybug. So if you want to get all 8 million species of animals on the ark, now you're talking a problem. But it's an artificial problem. It's not true.
So I guess what I'm trying to picture then is, I feel like I'm about to sandbag you here.
Go for it. I can handle it.
It sounds like you do accept evolution, just some like very, very rapid version of it.
Well, this is where you have to define the word evolution. I accept clearly the evidence is overwhelming that animals can produce a variety of offspring very rapidly. Very rapidly. Within 50 years, I bet you could get 1,000 varieties of dogs.
Okay.
But it's still a dog.
Right.
So if by evolution you mean microevolution, variation within what every 4-year-old would say is the same kind. I mean, a 4-year-old would tell you a Great Dane and a Chihuahua and a pug are the same kind of animal. It's a dog. It's obviously not a horse. It's not a pig. It's not a mosquito. It's a dog. So I do accept very clearly the evidence is overwhelming for what we sometimes call microevolution. I think the term is confusing. I prefer to call it simple variation within the same kind.
And here we get, and I know you've gone back and forth with
Sure.
R and Ra about what a kind is, and
Well, what's a species?
Right, and I think I'm pretty happy to grant that a species is a fairly nebulous
It's a fuzzy term. Yeah.
And even looking at the taxonomic clades and stuff, they seem to be kind of, I'm definitely not a biologist, but there seems to continuously be new research like, oh, maybe this fits a little better over here or over there.
They're always moving them around.
And but I guess, so broad picture then, let's just picture, we'll go back 4,400 years ago, whatever this dog kind was that came off, or the two of them, I guess. 'Cause
Right.
Wait, are they clean or? Anyway.
Dogs are not clean.
Dogs are not clean.
Pink one and a blue one. Get off the ark, right?
Okay. So they come off the ark. Now they're not, those proto whatever they are, we'll call them dogs. They're not wolves or foxes or coyotes. They're none of those things. So at some point, this line about, bringing forth after your kind, at some point, what you're going to have is, at least at the population level, something that is not a wolf giving birth to a wolf, or something that is not I can't think of another, a coyote giving birth to a coyote. And I think that sort of, when you flip it the other way, like, yes, dogs always give birth to dogs. But, if you're expecting one to give birth to a platypus, like, that would be a little bit silly.
Correct. That would not happen. So I think the objection is that variations do happen. The two animals get off the ark that probably everybody would recognize and say, oh, that's a dog, or that's in the dog family. Now, they would have puppies, which would then have more puppies and more puppies, and some could have longer fur, some could have shorter fur, because it's variation already built into the gene code, okay? Those with longer fur are probably more comfortable in the cold weather, so they would tend to migrate toward the cold areas or would tend to survive better in the cold areas. If we turned all the dogs in the world loose in Alaska, within a couple of years, all the small, thin-furred dogs would die off. And short hair. Only the wolf type, body type would survive, and so nature would actually select a certain slice of the dog population to survive in Alaska, for instance. And by the same token, those that had shorter, thinner fur and longer legs that could stand the heat better, they would tend to survive better in areas like outback Australia desert or something. So nature would select, it wouldn't create anything, but it would select animals that would feel more comfortable there. For instance, in Alaska, I think the population is 1% black, African American. Mm-hmm. They just don't like the cold weather. It's not that they're not welcome there. It's not that they can't live there. They can go there and get a job. They just don't like the cold weather, so they don't go there. So the cold weather selects the ratio, and they're not really different races, but it selects the ratio of the skin colors.
Sure.
Certain people just don't like certain areas. I'm Norwegian. They like, I would sunburn easily in a desert country, a hot equatorial country. I could probably survive there, but I have to be careful because more likely to get skin cancer or a variety of skin things. So the blonde-haired, light-skinned people, that's the real Ken Hovind right there, okay? I can show you another tan line, but I won't.
That's okay.
Okay, so it's a matter of natural selection certainly works. However, it's a selection process, not a creative process.
But there must have been a creative process, because whatever features that these two dogs who came off of the ark had, like, that's just the features that they had.
Okay, what's different between a dog and a wolf that is so hard to believe they could come from a common ancestor?
Well, what about like a wolf and a coyote, or a wolf and a fox?
Okay.
Those are pretty radically different little
But they're not near as different as a fox and a whale.
Right.
But the evolution theory says fox and a whale have a common ancestor.
Well, fair
Doesn't
enough.
it?
Yeah.
And a mosquito.
Yeah, they all
Okay,
do.
well, that to me is ridiculous. A fox and a wolf, common ancestor, I could buy that. But a fox and a mosquito, I can't buy it.
Well, but I feel like we're circling this point so closely. Like,
okay.
Because it sounds like everything that you're saying is just like part of what evolution says, but just like missing just a few little bits, right? Because you talk about natural selection. Natural selection is definitely going to be the selective force that, is going to say like, hey, these mutations are favorable, right? We don't talk about, the strong survive. We talk about, fitness in terms of favorability.
I'd be careful about saying it's a mutation that's favorable. It's something already in the gene code. They already produce dogs. Some have long hair, some have short hair. It's not necessarily a mutation that it's favoring. It's part of the gene code that's already selected for.
Variation.
Very, very different than saying this mutation was favorable. Nobody's ever given an example of a beneficial mutation. Or do you know of any?
Let's grant all that.
Okay.
And just say like, okay, these two, I'm just going to call them proto-dogs that came off of the ark. Let's go ahead and grant that they already had all of the genetic information to make, long limbs, long hair, short hair.
The grandpa could turn into a wolf or a coyote or a fox or any of them. It had all that gene code.
Okay. You would still have to have this ridiculously quick process of change somehow. If you don't want to call it evolution, that's fine. I mean, it doesn't sound like evolution anymore when it happens this quickly, but these animals are going to have to change from generation to generation so rapidly to get the variation that we see just within canids that we see today, and then immediately just stop, just shut off after maybe 2,000 years or something like that. And
I don't think it has shut off. I think they're still creating new varieties. There was probably no such thing as a Chihuahua just 200 years ago.
Well, don't confuse breeds with species, though.
Well, this is where it gets a terminology thing. Breed, species, kind, sort, variety. There's never been a really solid... See, Carolus Linnaeus has come up with our classification system. We're always trying to classify things. We do that in our shop. Wrenches, is it open-end wrench, box wrench, ratchet wrench? I mean, come on. And there's always... Some are difficult. Where does this go? Does this go with the screwdrivers or the hammers? Which is it? Most are pretty easy, but there's a few difficult ones. Some animals are difficult to classify. Instead of going kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and saying species is the same as kind, well, I think with some species may be the same as kind. With others, it might be more genus or family level, or even class.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. I don't think God cares about Carolus Linnaeus' classification system.
Yeah, I don't think he does.
I think God said they bring forth after their kind, and that's what they've always done. And I think everybody would say, oh, hey, this is the same kind of animal.
But just a quick little thing, because I've heard you make that analogy. I do really enjoy your YouTube videos. I watch too much of it.
Keep watching. Keep watching.
No, they're really fun. Because I've heard you make that analogy between like wrenches and screwdrivers and stuff like that.
Right.
And it was something that came up actually in one of your responses to R and Ra. I think it was last night that would have been published today, but I can't remember. Where you were objecting to him calling, or I guess biologists calling humans apes or primates.
Correct.
And you listed a bunch of differences that we have, right? We have speech in apes, don't we? We have, the part of the brain that they don't. But that's confusing what an animal does versus what an animal is.
Okay, good point.
And when you make the tool analogy, right, when we make tools, we make them for a purpose. So when we organize, when we categorize tools, we do that based off of what they do rather than, what they are. That's just sort of the telos, if you will, of a tool.
Well, could we classify ink pens and pencils as in the same category in that they're designed for writing, but they're different in that one does it with a liquid, one does it with a solid, graphite, let's say, okay? I suppose we could split hairs and say these dogs are I would say the same kind of animal, but they're different variety. You may get a big dog or a little dog, and they're still dog and recognizable to everybody from 3 years old on up. This is not evidence that dogs and mosquitoes are related.
It just seems a little bit shaky to say that those two dogs are the same kind of dog, or the same kind of animal, I guess we want to say.
Technically, they can interbreed.
Right. I mean, not easily, but
a few mechanical problems, but hold still, honey.
I'm okay with calling those the same kind of animal, but I wouldn't be okay calling, those and a fox the same kind of animal. But it seems like we're committed to that view. And again, we still have this issue of just this rapid evolution of long limbs, short limbs, long fur, thick fur. And it sounds too, I don't mean to keep going, I'm sorry, but it sounds like you might have it flipped a little bit too, in that the change happens and then they just kind of go somewhere and then die off. And it's awfully close to the story that evolution would have. It's just flipped.
I would say these changes were brought about by man selecting it, and then once you select a particular trait, you got to babysit the dumb thing. Most of the cows that they've selected to give more milk, we took my students to see the cow that happened to be that year the world record holder for giving the most milk. It gave 100 pounds a day. 100 pounds of milk every day. It was in Kankakee, Illinois. We went to the farm. And the poor thing could barely walk.
No.
Utterly ridiculous. But
oh my God.
If you take that thing out in the woods, that's never going to last in the woods. Most of the varieties of dogs, most of those wouldn't last 2 weeks on their own. You got to babysit them. Those like the pug with the wrinkled fur. I mean, gee whiz, how many ticks and parasites are going to get in that wrinkled skin, So the fact that man can create this or select this and then help it to survive doesn't mean that's artificial selection.
Sure.
Did you have a question?
And isn't there a possibility that a fox and a dog could have both been on the ark?
It might have been two varieties of dogs. I don't know what Noah had on the ark. But see, to take that, what I think is a relatively minor concern, and therefore conclude that dogs and mosquitoes are related, is a wild leap of faith. I don't understand where the kind barrier is in every place, but I don't think a mosquito and a dog are the same kind. Now that I'd bet money on that.
And I would totally agree that it's just a totally minor, where if it were just dogs, right? But when we look at the diversity of life that is just clearly present, and the fact that we've only discovered, I haven't seen recent, what is it, maybe something like 10-20% of all extant species. I imagine the missing ones are bugs, so that's
most
not
of them
super
are bugs.
interesting.
Yeah. How would you know? If you don't know how many there are, you don't know how many you're missing. So
yeah. I never quite got how they make
Right.
those kinds of estimates either. But looking at this variation, well, now it's like, okay, what was a very small problem with dogs becomes a really serious issue with just speciation of everything. If we're talking 8,000 kinds to get to the millions of species that are currently living. And to go from, I'm sorry, I don't want to make another point here.
I'll just wildly, I don't know if I get internet in here or not. Yeah. How many varieties of ladybugs are there? Can I get it on my phone? Yeah. Okay. It's into the thousands, I believe, based on what color, how many spots do they have, and how are the spots arranged. Come on, it's a ladybug, for heaven's sake. How many varieties of people are there? Take a look around the room. Is anybody here identical?
Well, there's identical, and then there's, look at the differences. Ladybugs is kind of an odd sort of selection. If we go to beetles, right?
Sure.
Goodness gracious.
How many varieties of beetles are in the world?
I'm going to guess 30,000.
According to Understanding Evolution, while there are 250,000 described
that's
species of plants,
plants.
12,000 described species of roundworms, and only 4,000 described species of mammals, there are over 350,000 beetle species described, with many more beetles yet to be discovered.
So there are 350,000 beetle species.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Well, for one thing, you can't become famous in this field unless you find a new one, so they're trying to make everyone a new one by, that same thing. That was the problem with dinosaurs years ago. When they were digging up the bones, nobody knows who found the fourth stegosaurus. Who found the first stegosaurus? That guy's famous, okay, but who found the fourth one?
Right.
Nobody cares. So they tried very hard to look for a bump or something different on, and make it into a new one. So I think the word species, that's why I say, let's first define the word evolution. Can you get that on screen? I always give it 6 meanings. It drives guys like R. and Nelson crazy. But I think microevolution, variations within the kinds, certainly happens. And that's as far as it goes. Everything above this is a religious belief that people believe happened, but it's never observed. Get it where you can see it over there. You probably
No, I can see it.
Okay.
Oh, those guys,
Yeah,
sorry.
it's never observed. It's not science is my whole point. And I object to teaching that as part of science. It's part of a religion. It's a state-funded religion. If you want to believe mosquitoes and whales have a common ancestor, that's fine. I don't care what you believe. I do object to paying for that in the schools. It's not part of science.
So even if we were to say, I can kind of see your argument here about, I kind of want to be famous. Maybe I want to have a beetle named after me. I've relegated my life to, studying bugs. A noble pursuit, but maybe not a super famous one. And so you want to have the Kent Hovind beetle. I want to have the Alex Wayland beetle, right?
Sure.
But even if we were to grant that and just say, okay, because 350,000 species is a lot, and beetles come in so many different shapes and sizes, right? Like I don't think that I could properly even say that, like, oh, that's definitely a beetle. Like, are cockroaches beetles? I'm genuinely asking. Does anybody know? Like, there's a lot of different, I mean, just the way that they look, the way that they present themselves, and the environments in which they live. It's wild to think that, 2 beetles on an ark could have produced that.
First of all, the Bible clearly teaches the insects did not have to go on the ark at all.
Oh.
Well, God told Noah to bring on, he said, he don't have to bring anything. He said, they will come to you. 2 of each kind on land in whose nostrils is the breath of life. Well, insects breathe through their skin. Insects can survive floods just fine. Go any place there's been a flood, when the water goes down, walk out in the mud. First thing you find is a billion insects attacking you in the mud. So Noah would not have to have beetles on the ark at all. Okay, just air-breathing, land-dwelling animals. He didn't have to bring fish on the ark. They had plenty of water outside, more than normal. So if you narrow it down to the land-breathing, like the Bible says, read Genesis 7 and 8 very carefully, those on land in whose nostrils is the breath of life. Well, there's no bugs have nostrils. There's no, so, but if you look at the beetles, I would suspect that they class beetles, cockroaches, in the beetle family.
Those are a lot of different. It looks
And
like
I don't care.
It looks like jewelry almost. All the colors and
You'd
stuff.
almost think it was created if you didn't know better, wouldn't you?
It is really pretty.
Zoom in on varieties of beetles.
So on that note, so the argument, or I guess the claim here, is that the insects didn't have to come on because they could have survived. Now, I'm happy to grant that insects who live in and near water could have survived a flood, but there's plenty of insects that don't.
Oh, sure. But see, if you have a worldwide flood, you would have huge log mass the size of Texas floating around that humans could not survive on for weeks, but insects could. They could survive on floating dead carcasses. Plus, the fact that Noah was in the ark for a year does not mean the whole planet was flooded for a year. Lennox might have only been flooded for a couple of months. The crust of the earth is certainly broken up. I don't think anybody argues about that. I taught earth science for years, and there are plates to the earth, and they're flexing up and down. Some parts might have been underwater, some might have been above water, and this would change and vary throughout the flood. Sections lifted up, water would rush off. I don't argue at all with plate tectonics. I do argue that it hasn't been going for millions of years. I think it broke up when the flood waters burst forth from underneath, Genesis chapter 7. And so the insects would survive on floating log mats or dead carcasses. Go to any flood, watch this, the water swirling around automatically collects things into piles. floating together, floating debris. Watch New Orleans tomorrow when the hurricane hits.
That's going to be rough. Yeah.
Well, if you build a city 20 feet below sea level, I think you can expect a few problems.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. But, so, yeah, I don't see a problem. But see, the assumed problems, for instance, of all these insects coming from a few varieties, God might have created 10,000 varieties of beetles, and now there's 350. It's by some man's classification system. If I showed you a Madagascar hissing cockroach compared to the Alabama cockroach, you would say, they're both a cockroach.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody has decided, oh no, this is a hissing cockroach and this is this. How are you going to divide this? Is a Volkswagen hatchback and a Volkswagen 4-door and a Volkswagen 2-door? It's a Volkswagen. It's built on the same frame. You know, it's a variation of the same car. Same frame, same engine, just a different body style. So I think most of the splitting of hairs goes over, I took it off already, goes over the variations within obviously the same kind. Is a Great Dane and a Chihuahua the same kind of animal? Is it the same species? Actually, it is the same species.
Yeah, it's totally the same species.
But they look wildly different.
Right. The dog analogy, I do have a little bit of trouble with, just because, and I love dogs to death. I don't mean to, what I'm about to say is going to kind of sound mean, but they almost fit better into the tool category because people bred dogs for specific purposes.
And most wouldn't survive.
Right. I mean,
Right.
without without somebody.
Well, same thing with most of our farm animals. You know, the huge pigs, for most of the farm animals wouldn't make it in the wild.
Yeah. No, they've been totally domesticated.
So, for instance, with a deer, how many varieties of deer are there? Gee whiz.
Yeah, that's a bunch.
This thing, you can find it all the time, There's a Chinese water deer. Have you ever seen that one? Got the big tusk like a saber-tooth.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those.
Saber-toothed tiger. How many varieties of deer are in the world? I asked the question, is an elk and a
Here's
moose?
a summary from PBS.
Okay.
Highly adaptable, the deer is able to succeed where other species cannot, in wild spaces that border
Again, tell
developed
us.
areas, suburban homes, and farmland. Just a century ago, there were around 1 million deer in North America. There are 30 million. Learn about whitetail anatomy, diet, habitat,
This is what
and
I
other
Okay,
do.
okay.
That's okay.
We've got 11 deer that live on our property. They run across the road here all the time. So, the Bible says that's why I think sticking with the biblical term kind is safe. They're the same kind.
I worry that it's such a loose term that it loses meaning.
Well,
right?
so is species a loose term.
It can be loose. I mean, and I think some of the problems with it are that some species just produce asexually. So if you're going to say that, oh, it's something that, these two are the same species, if they can interbreed, and produce viable offspring, well, here's two worms or whatever that don't. But this notion of kind seems to work at just so many different levels. You mentioned at the family level and the genus level, and I could be on board at some point, but you had mentioned positive mutations, and I know that you've responded to this one, bacteria that are able to digest nylon.
Sure.
Now, your response is?
Is that something that I bet people on a deserted island, if they were dying of starvation, could probably learn to digest trees and eat leaves and trees.
Oh, I don't think we can change our digestive system so quickly. I
Well,
mean,
wouldn't
we
change-
could probably eat.
I don't think the bacteria changed our digestive system. They changed their diet. Is the system still the same? It just now has new input. You can run your fireplace off of wood, or you could probably run it off of telephone books. You could change the input, but it's still a fireplace. So I think you can digest lots of things. Now, nylon, the bacteria that are able to digest nylon, first of all, you got to start with an incredibly complex creature, a bacteria, with an incredibly complex digestive system, and then all of a sudden something new is thrown at it, nylon. Oh, and it happened to either have a mutation that allowed that, or it simply already had the ability and had an adaptation, starving to death. So, I mean, people lived off of other people. I mean, the plane crash in, what was that, Peru, up in the...
Right.
Yeah, they had to eat other people that died, and so you can learn to... I was in Italy, and they had horse. We ate horse. All right. 2 minutes till we run out of time.
Oh, okay.
I have another debate?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I gotta get connected with him instead of.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, well, let's do this again. What else would you like to say to the people here?
Just Thank you for having us. I don't know. It was really fun. I learned a bunch. And I got to check something off my bucket list today, which was to debate Dr. Hovind. So, I don't know. I've been watching him for so long that, like, I'm like, I don't know. Ask him. I was totally fanboying yesterday on the phone. It was kind of embarrassing.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Suppose you decided, I'm going to do it like you guys do to us. Suppose you decided to accept the idea that there's a creator.
Okay.
Now, they always say you don't accept evolution. No, you have to believe in evolution. Okay. If you decided to accept the idea that there's a creator and that he would be obligated to write a book to tell us what he did, and that book is the Bible. Oh, what would that change? A, about your lifestyle. B, about your, would they probably fire you at the university because you're not?
Oh, no. In fact,
sure?
I'm positive.
Okay, good.
I'm the only atheist in my department.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll fix that.
You're going to convert the other people in my department to atheists? Don't do that. Oh, you meant, okay, I get it now. What would change about, gosh, it's just so hard to imagine, you know, but I mean, it's certainly not something that, like, I'm fundamentally opposed to or anything like that.
Okay.
But, and this is going to sound really mean, but when I do read parts of the Bible, it just sounds like a vindictive war god, you know,
okay.
throwing boulders at people to kill them, sicking she-bears on some kids because they made fun of a bald dude. Like, get over it, man. Like, you're God. I'm almost kind of glad that God doesn't exist.
Okay.
He doesn't sound like a very nice person.
Does it sound mean with the survival of the fittest concept that the inferiors have to die off for the fit to survive?
Well, we're no longer in a moral claim anymore, right? That's just something that happens. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about what ought to happen, what should happen. And I think there are going to be plenty of philosophers who disagree with this, but I do think that we can make moral valuations of, the God character in the Bible. I don't know if I'm in the majority or minority on that. I don't do a whole lot of, philosophy, religion, or anything. But there are plenty of people who are going to say you can't question God, right? You can't morally question God.
Oh, I'm willing to question anything.
Oh, okay.
I'm willing to show me. I'll question every verse in the Bible. Say, I don't believe that verse. Oh, let's talk about that. So far, my 50 years of experience has led me to believe I can trust it all. But it's not a blind faith. I mean, I'm very willing to. Somebody says this is a problem. Okay, let's talk about that. So. Since we're out of time, would you be interested in me coming to your school? We can bring the camera down, videotape in front of your class, in front of your students. Bring any other professors that believe in evolution. I'll take them all on the same time, if I get half the time. And let's continue the discussion in front of your students. Get the whole student body to come.
I mean, I will definitely be in touch. That's
Okay.
not a decision, I'm able to make at my, assistant professor
Here's
level.
my card.
Cool.
You want something to give out to your students? Say, call this guy.
But yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
For having me. This was super fun.
Well,
Really fun day.
Now, as far as all that other stuff aside, would you recommend people come to Dinosaur Adventureland to take the tour?
I definitely would, although, maybe when it's a little bit cooler. Or
as
maybe
far
when
as-
you get you guys AC fixed in the creation.
Well, that's another
Science
long
Museum.
story, yeah.
But no, it was really fun. I definitely learned a lot. It's something that would appeal to me a lot. I don't know, I know a lot of other people would be like, oh my God. But, I really enjoyed it.
So they try to portray me as a right-wing radical, fire-breathing, baby-killing, whatever, the movies always have the preacher, the guy with the hatchet, and somebody hidden in the closet that he cut up.
I haven't seen your closet, so I don't know.
Okay, you can come look at it if you like. It's got a bunch of Hawaiian shirts in it somebody gave me.
I believe that.
50 of them. Okay, so yeah, well, I thank you for coming. I'd be glad. Sorry we didn't have more time.
Oh, that's okay.
But come back anytime. We can do it again. You're only Mobile.
Yeah.
80 miles away.
Yeah, it was a quick little drive.
So get with my secretary, Rhonda, and say, I'd like to schedule another time. Come on up. We can set up here and video do this anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And I'd like you to give me the best 3 evidences you know of for evolution above what I would call the variations within the same kind. I'm assuming you do believe a mosquito and a whale had a common ancestor. Why would you believe such a thing? What is the best evidence? Maybe you can get it together. We'll do it next time.
Yeah, okay. Let's do that.
Sounds great. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Sorry, we'll have another debate in 30 minutes. I got to get set up for that. And I love these kind of things. All right. Thank you.